Welcome to A Cult of Personality, esoteric podcast extraordinaire. I'm Greg Kaminsky, and your co-host is Billy Hepper. Now, in episode number 222, we have another very special interview for you. You love his books, and he always educates and entertains us beyond all expectations. The one and only Peter Mark Adams returns to the podcast to discuss his most recent masterpiece, Hagia Sophia, Sanctum of Kronos, Spiritual Dissent in an Age of Tyranny. You can find Peter online at petermarkadams.com. Peter Mark Adams is an author, poet, and essayist who specializes in the ethnography and visuality of ritual, sacred landscape, esotericism, consciousness, and healing. His latest book, Hagia Sophia, Sanctum of Kronos, Spiritual Dissent in an Age of Tyranny, is a study of the sacred architecture of the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, Turkey, which dates back to the 6th century. Adams examines the sacred traditions encoded within the structure, from the ancient rites of Eleusis to the School of Alexandria, and offers a fresh and penetrating perspective on how architectural details and history can be read and understood. The book traces a journey across the Hellenistic world as its classical culture teeters on the brink of extinction at the hands of religious zealots. Once again, from start to finish, this interview is lit. Peter Mark Adams demonstrates over and over through the conversation how his mastery of his subject is all-encompassing. From Adams's work, we can now fully understand the significance of this holy structure and how its history and the context of spirituality which it embodies is sublime and majestic. Through understanding and appreciating human achievement in service of devotion, we participate to some degree in its intention and purpose as well. Peter Mark Adams is one of our favorite guests, and this interview demonstrates why. I cannot recommend Hagia Sophia, Sanctum of Kronos highly enough. If you appreciate the most original and important esoteric scholarship available today, then you're already a fan of his work. If not, you really should be. I know this intro is long enough already, and I don't mean to delay you from hearing the actual interview, but I need to take a moment here to recognize the great fortune we have to read and learn what it is that Peter Mark Adams has uncovered for us yet again. In a superlative third book, Adams has shown us a level of research, insight, and ability to understand ancient religion and spirituality that is perhaps unmatched. It is a true blessing to share the fruits of his labors, and we celebrate his work. A Cult of Personality podcast is made possible by you, the listeners, and by the subscribers to chamberofreflection.com, our membership website, who aids us in the cause of informed, authentic, and accessible interviews about Western esotericism. Thank you again. Because of your support, we're able to bring you recordings of this caliber and many more to come. The intro music is Awakening by Paul Avgerinos, and the outro music is Night of the Brazen Serpent by Equinox, our own Billy Hepper. Peter Mark Adams, I want to welcome you back to the podcast. It is always a pleasure to speak with you. Today we're talking about your recent book, Hagia Sophia, Sanctum of Kronos, Spiritual Dissent in an Age of Tyranny, published, of course, by the one and only Scarlet Imprint. Another phenomenal book that, you set a high standard with Game of Saturn, and then you've never really, diverged from that standard, I don't think. And this book is no exception. So welcome, and thank you for joining us.
No, thank you, Greg. Lovely to see you both there, Billy. It's a pleasure to be back on with you. And like it's like every 3 years we do this.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think my writing is getting better because I practice so much. It's a lot of intense, it's like 20 years of apprenticeship.
Mhm.
And I always try and pay attention to the quality of the prose, because the books are not just data dumps. They're meant to have a quality that allows you to start connecting to the energies and the fields that I'm discussing. That's really why I'm doing it. They're not historical works per se, or even art history, although art history and history are integral to them. But the purpose is really to awaken the esoteric current in its various recensions over time. And those recensions, I'm convinced, remain as essential today as they've ever been. It's the motivating or driving factor behind the work I do.
That's a profound and meaningful intent, motivation. And I feel like your work makes me feel so joyful because it's so excellent. Like, your scholarship is phenomenal. You're always revealing things that I never knew. And I think most of your readers are always surprised, shocked, enlightened by your research. And you're right, the way that you're able to convey the sense of feeling and the energies of these specific things that you investigate is truly a gift, and we're blessed to be able to have your work. So
thank you. I would say one thing about that is that when I embark on these projects, there's a period of gestation. On none of the books I've written has there been a background of giving lectures or preparation of any kind. But there's been considerable gestation, sometimes over decades. In the case of the Hagia Sophia, over the course of something like 30 years, living in proximity to the building, having visited it so many times. And even the fact of living in proximity to it is an integral part of the process by which the book emerges. So the writing process is like the easier or simpler or it's like the tip of the iceberg, essentially. Because during the gestation period, I'm drawn to something, and then it starts to fill itself out, but it's an emotional filling out. It's a sense that something is there that needs to be spoken, needs to be articulated, that hasn't been articulated up to now. So I embark on this like dark night of the soul, not knowing what the outcome will be, but committing myself to 8, 10, 12 hours work per day over the next 2-3 years to realize it. So each one is like a heartfelt expression of that journey of discovery. And I think in a sense that it's guided. That's the sense I have of it. Often I have visionary type dreams in association with the book as the project unfolds. So I feel like there's a back and two between worlds. And for instance, in the case of the Hagia Sophia book, the revelations about the decorative design, I think it's the first time it's ever been decoded as essentially a representation of the Hellenistic afterlife. Although the building has been open to everybody to walk through and look at, nobody has questioned why the decorative design is executed in the way it is. Everyone has just been happy to think of it as it's a Christian church and that's decoration, which is, I understand that. But the building has such a profound atmosphere. There has to be something more going on there. And that's what interests or intrigues me. And so I start asking questions of my own experience as to whether the depth of my response to the architecture, to the design, is commensurate with what I'm actually experiencing as a physical artifact. So for me, that discrepancy between what I sense about the building and what other people are saying is the gap. I need to traverse that gap. So in this case, certainly an essay by Anthony Kaldelis was enormous help. He has an essay about the designers of the building, traces them back to the Hellenistic schools of Alexandria, to Eutychius, who was a student of Anthemius. And so you have a sense there has to be more going on. When you look at who these people studied under, you're immediately deep in the Hermetic tradition, going all the way back to Athens, and from Athens through Proclus, all the way. And I just kept tracing it, just as you'd pull on a string and follow it, into the labyrinth. And it took me all the way back to Asclepius. Hardly anyone in the esoteric community has spoken about her or her pivotal role. And from her to her father, Plutarch of Athens, and from him to the last Hierophant of the Eleusinian mysteries, Nestorius. And that story alone is a remarkable one of perseverance in belief and in spiritual aspiration in the face of oppression. Okay. So the fact that the designers were at the very end of that long chain stretching over like 1.5 centuries is significant. And it caused me to begin looking at the building in a very different way than I had before. I thought, if such a profound spiritual tradition existed and persisted through all of the oppression that it suffered, there's no way in which the designers would have overlooked that tradition when they came to think about, okay, we have a commission for the largest church ever to be built. How was our tradition going to be embedded within it? And I just felt so absolutely sure that they would have done something along the lines of ensuring or encoding the Hellenistic tradition within the building's architecture and decorative design. So again, going along with fresh eyes and begin looking for the clues, looking for the omissions in the standard histories and the art history of the building. What had been noticed but never explained. That was a critical point, a turning point in the analysis. And primarily it started with the floor of the building and its representation as a sea. And the fact the sea had these 4 embedded marble strips in it, which were not really, they were different widths and spread at different parts of the flooring. And this has been mentioned in the literature, in the academic literature. Nobody has ever tried to explain it. Sometimes they'd say, well, maybe it's the 4 rivers of Eden, but that doesn't really work if you look at the Genesis. There was 1 river running through Eden, and it did split into 4 rivers, but after it had left. So it didn't, and in any case, the rivers of Eden went through a garden, not through another sea. So, and that kicks off a search. Where is there evidence of a sea with 4 rivers in it in the entire Hellenistic tradition? And I think it was Peter Kingsford's work. He picks out the 4 rivers of purification for souls in the underworld. I thought, that was like a light went on in my head then. But you can't imagine how much digging around you have to do to put all this together with the physical evidence that you're seeing each day. The floor of the building is massive. I mean, standing on one side of the floor, you cannot even see the rivers. You need to have a very close acquaintanceship with the building over a considerable period of time to absorb its detail, because it has this complex acoustic. So there's like continuous echoes, and there's the strange, sharp light and deep shadow, and there's the sheer size and the number of golden domes and semi-domes. So there's like a sensory overload when you go in there. And it takes considerable time to overcome that and begin to discern the underlying architecture. So I think, unless you lived here for quite some period and had access to the building over a considerable time, it's very difficult to isolate these items. And also, you of course, you have to free yourself from the framing of the building. Oh, it's just a Christian church. Again, one of the major features of the Hagia Sophia is that it's unlike any other church of its age. We're almost certain that the same craftsmen who worked on it would have worked on the buildings in Ravenna, for instance, in northern Italy, in the Byzantine capital of Italy. And yet, when you look at the architectural design of those buildings, they're like floor to ceiling covered in frescoes and mosaic depictions of the life of the saints and so on and so forth. Whereas the Hagia Sophia is, by contrast, is devoid of any imagery, any ostensive imagery. It's like a echo chamber, if I were to describe it. Nothing has been done to compromise the play of light and sound within the vast vault. And as a result, it has this most incredible sustain, something like 12 to 14 seconds of sound, of every sound that is made in the building, so that all the sounds kind of echo around the floor, the walls, and through the dome and semi-domes and back again. So there's an incredible sensory distortion going on in the building. And that had to be deliberate. And certainly when I looked at the backgrounds of the two designers, it was quite clear. One was expert in reflection of light and sound. The other was an expert in stereometry, three-dimensional geometry, and especially with specialization in vaulting. That's to say, domes, semi-domes, pendentives, arches. And, you bring these two top experts together, and that's the result. It's one of the most astounding buildings ever constructed. Sorry, I'm talking too long.
No, you're not. You're not. I don't want to interrupt you. It's too good. But I feel that on some level that what you're talking about right now, there's so much, and there's no real clear starting point. I feel like you just have to jump in the middle. So I'm gonna ask Billy, like, where do you want to begin here?
Boy, yeah, there's so much to dig into here. But Peter, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you for coming on to the show. It's great to finally be able to meet with you. I have to say I was particularly keen to have an opportunity to sit down with you, because the previous episode on this podcast with Greg a few years ago, where you two discussed your book, The Game of Saturn, was one of my absolute favorite episodes on occulted personality.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Billy. Thank you.
I know a lot of our listeners feel the same. So it was just an amazing conversation. So the bar has been set very high by that one. So hopefully we can recreate some of that magic here today. It was a great book and just a great experience reading it. I really enjoyed it. I just felt like I was entering into this sort of inner sanctum of the Hagia Sophia, just the combination of the, photography, the deep exploration of the mysteries of the structure. It just, as a reader, it really sets the tone to kind of get you into the right headspace, I think, to delve deep into this study. So it was just wonderful to go through your book.
Yeah, I think Scarlet Imprint are really, done an absolutely exceptional job with the design as well. It's absolutely stunning.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
and Harvard Dumbarton Oaks, you know, their Center of Byzantine Studies were very helpful. You know, I told them about the project, and they said, you know, we've got all this imagery, just, you know, let us know what you want. So I got a set of the architectural drawings, which were done by Robert Van Nys back in the 40s or 50s. And I got all the fantastic study in light and shadow, which was Pierre Skender, a local photographer, again, you know, in 40s and 50s. And then I have a friend here who's a leading, I mean, award-winning photographer himself, Murat Palat. And I went in the building with him, and I knew exactly what I needed to document to provide the evidence for what my argument was going to be. And so we spent like the day in the building photographing specific parts of the marble revetment and so on. And I knew it would match exactly with the text. So that, you know, in the book, you have a kind of visual entry to some of the things I'm exploring. You know, a lot of the writing has the phenomenology, you know, what I experienced going in there. And we try to give the reader a taste of that with the photography. And then it's got all the evidence for the Platonic references encoded within the decorative design. And again, the photography relating to that is in the book. So we try to, and again, you know, Scarlet Imprint have done such a great job to bring it together. So there's a fusion of image and text in an absolutely beautifully designed book. You know, I couldn't be more delighted with the outcome.
Yeah, the photography is just absolutely stunning. Just the use of light and shadow and just the sort of aesthetic beauty of it. As a reader, I just thought it was so superbly done. You know, obviously there's this theme of light and shadow in the photos. It's just, hopefully we can touch a little bit more on that later on, because it's obvious that the designers of this church put a great deal of thought and intent into the lighting effects within this structure. It's just incredible.
Yeah, it's a multi-sensory design from top to bottom. Yeah.
I'm curious, Peter, that I guess my first question would be the title of your new book has this sort of tagline, Spiritual Dissent in the Age of Tyranny. Could you shed some light on that for us? I'm just curious what you're referring to with this idea of spiritual dissent in the age of tyranny.
Yeah, I think one of the guiding concepts in the writing of the book was the notion of counter mapping. And the idea was to give voice to those minor voices overlooked or suppressed by history. And that includes people like Asclepius, who carried the weight of the Eleusinian mystery initiation for almost a century as a kind of full-time job, and yet then kind of disappears from history altogether. Similarly with the designers of the building. So there's this process whereby the adoption of Christianity by the emperor, I don't say by the empire, by the people, by the emperor, in order to sort out the competing Christianities that he was confronted with. As essentially the political problem they had was how to hold the empire together as a union in the face of mounting pressure. Okay, so part of that was to attempt to bring order to the belief system, to the dominant belief system, and try, you know, like so in Alexandria, in Damascus or Antioch, all the bishops all had their own flavor of Christianity. Yeah. And, you know, they held on to it with a lot of force. And then on top of that, there were countless Gnostic sects. And then that kind of merged with the ongoing pagan and Hellenistic tradition. So you have this enormous scattering of cultural fragments. And I think in an attempt to unify the empire, you know, one thing Justinian attempted to do was to restore Rome's imperial borders. and possibly that bankrupted him ultimately, as it does all empires, trying to hold it together. And the other thing he tried to do was he reformed the legal system, and we have to give him, credit for that. He actually brought order to a chaos and created a legal system that became the basis of European law today. So the other side of this was the question of belief. And in an attempt to try and unify the beliefs, unfortunately, people like John of Ephesus, who were, how to describe them, they were zealots, went out and destroyed a large part of the culture. If I'm not mistaken, at some point, Justinian contacted him and begged him to stop the monks from destroying the statues and the monuments. He said there's too much of the culture is getting lost. So although we pin this oppression on Justinian, he wasn't always in command of the various bands of monks from different, Monophysites and Arians and so on, who took it upon themselves, for instance, to sack the sanctuary of Eleusis. Nobody, as far as we know, ordered them to do that. It was just out of overwhelming zeal for righteousness. It's something we see periodically in history. People who should know better overstep the religious mark and become oppressors in the name of that religion. And that certainly happened at that time. Part of it was inspired by Justinian. Part of it was inspired by his attempt to control the Byzantine aristocracy, because he was from a peasant background himself. Mm. And sitting in the city at that time were aristocrats who had 4 or 5 generations of Roman emperor in their ancestry. Trying to control those people was really another job. So challenged on so many fronts, the result was a kind of tyranny that took hold of the Hellenistic oecumen. And not all of it, as I say, was directed by Justinian. A lot of it was done on a local basis. But it was a fierce oppression of divergent beliefs and practices. So that's the age of tyranny. It was a severe age in that respect. The subtitle of the book, however, Sanctum of Kronos, will confuse a lot of people. It actually refers to a line in Pindar, in which Pindar's second Olympian, he describes the Hellenistic afterlife in beautiful poetic phrases. And he talks about the souls of the just who proceed from the meadow of judgment towards the tower of Kronos. And what he's referring to there is the notion of Kronos as representing the golden age of perfection. And given the spiritual dimension of the Hellenistic tradition, this golden age, of course, is a state of non-dual awareness. It was henosis, or union with the deity, that's being referred to. The poetic discourse is the Tower of Kronos. And so I wanted to capture in there that the building itself represents the Tower of Kronos as so to speak, metaphorically constructed on the Hellenistic afterlife. Okay, I hope that accounts for the rather bizarre title of the book.
No, thank you. That's wonderful. And I think just to return to your earlier point, just about the times when this church was erected. I mean, it was extremely volatile, like you were saying. And this is not justification for Justinian's actions, but
yeah,
I think you have to look at previous emperors. Like you had, Julian the Apostate a few centuries earlier, who was an emperor who was, seeking to reestablish paganism as the state religion. And, he would order all Christian sites and churches burned. He threw priests and bishops in prison, engaged in all sort of, persecutions against Christian communities. So I think this would have all been very fresh in the minds of the people during Justinian's time as well. So there was this sort of back and forth. I think it was a very, very volatile time.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just that, there were kind of constant pressure on the borders of the empire, along the Danube and through the Balkans. And then, there was pressure from Persia, the border with the Persian Empire. So, a lot of pressure points, a lot of points where conflict very quickly sprung up.
Peter, I'm wondering if you could, you touched on it briefly, but I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about the manner in which the ancient Greek mysteries were preserved and perpetuated even long after the culture that birthed them was gone.
Do you mean specifically the Egyptian mysteries?
No, I mean, I think more the Greek mysteries, like Lucius, and how you mentioned Nestorius is this final hierophant, and yet it seemed that the tradition went on, even maybe without the full blossoming of the fruit of it.
Yeah, I think in many ways, the destruction of the sanctuary of Eleusis after possibly 1,000 years triggered a fundamental shift in esoteric thought, in the respect that the initiatory tradition was deemed to have been handed to certain families by the deity itself. And therefore, they had an absolute responsibility to ensure the survival of that tradition. I don't think there was any question about that. This was not just a job handed on within a family. It was a full spiritual tradition that they embodied and conveyed to others through the mystery process. Of course, before the sanctuary was sacked, the mysteries of Eleusis, as I say, for almost 1,000 years, had been embedded in a sacred landscape, which ran from Athens itself along the sacred route all the way out to Eleusis, with a number of stops on the way where prayers and performances would be performed to arrive at the sanctuary. And within the sanctuary itself, there was a whole landscape, a sacred landscape, which was wrapped around myths of the deities. Okay, so this is a kind of totalizing vision of a landscape and a mystery tradition and the mythic traditions of the race, so to speak, of the Athenian race, and of everyone else who came to partake of this. So that destroying the sanctuary really removed the landscape in which this tradition was embedded. And what we see then is the determination to continue to convey the initiatory tradition in an urban environment. And for me, this is kind of pivotal in the history of Western esotericism, because it lost its anchor in a sacred landscape and became something which would be familiar to all of us. Small urban communities. And within that context, so Nestorius and his son, Plutarch of Athens, a priest of Asclepius, opened a small community within Athens in which they continued to convey the initiation. But to do so, they had to prepare people adequately. Now, their problem was that when you came to join in the mysteries at Eleusis, you only needed kind of to do the purification and show up. Because there was a permanent priesthood there, the tradition was so to speak embedded. It was always there for anyone every year. But once the sanctuary had gone and the priesthoods were effectively broken up, there was no anchoring of the tradition anymore. And therefore, it had to start to be conveyed as a set of teachings. Okay, so once you lose a priesthood that's locked into an environment, and you shift it to an urban environment in which people come and go, you need to start conveying the essence of the tradition verbally as well as through initiation, in order for that tradition to survive into the future. And this is what I surmise happened, so that they started to teach what we would think of as Pythagoreanism or Orphism as a metaphysical body of knowledge alongside, and sorry, that would include mathematics, by the way. It was not just philosophy. It was mathematics as well, very, very much a core part of it. And on top of that, they would be taught the practice of theurgy. So following on from the lead of Iamblichus, they had developed a 7-step program, developmental program, to bring people to a state where they could engage in theurgy independently and connect to the deity, to achieve henosis or union with the deity, purely mystical state. So it was in many ways an incredible achievement to go from a position where the priesthood did everything for you and you just had to kind of show up fully prepared for the initiation and go away, knowing that you could show up any year and redo the entire experience, to go from there to a point where you would need to go along for specialist training to be able to take that tradition away with you so that it could survive into the future. And so what I see Nestorius and Plutarch of Athens doing is, as I say, they picked up on Iamblichus's 7-stage developmental program, the ladder of virtues, and used that as a governing framework in an urban setting to train people to be able to go away back to Alexandria, to Aphrodisias, Constantinople, the other centers, and carry the tradition with them. This is what I see essentially happened in the late 4th and early 5th centuries. And then they were, because of the prestige of Eleusis and of the initiatory tradition, they of course drew to them some of the finest minds of that age, the most spiritually dedicated people like Proclus, Syrianus, Damascius. It's like a roll call of the intellectual elite of 1.5 centuries who came there specifically not to study Plato. I mean, they could have studied Plato at any one of a dozen schools in Athens that specialized in Platonic philosophy. They came there to learn how to conduct theurgy. And so having received the initiation, which was passed on to Asclepigenea, that's Plutarch's daughter, having the initiation, they were empowered to practice theurgical rites, that's to say, to reconnect to the deity through the practice of theurgy. And the rest of it was developmental work to ensure that people had sufficient preparation to ground the tradition. Otherwise, I mean, we probably all experienced people who received an initiation and then went off and did something else and kind of then said, well, I had that initiation, but I never did anything with it. You know, this is a kind of a human failing, let's call it that, you know. So I think they were fully aware of the danger of this if they just started imparting initiations. And without a priesthood and a sanctuary, it just becomes too insubstantial, and it's in danger then of being lost. Okay, so they set up an apparatus, a school, a system to try and ground the initiation as a cultural and spiritual phenomenon. I don't know, I hope that's not too elaborate, but it seems to me like a pivotal period in Western esoteric history.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I certainly appreciate the depth of your explanation, because you really brilliantly highlighted this notion of a transformation between, a priesthood established in a sanctuary conveying something versus needing to perpetuate the tradition in the world where it's at risk. And esoteric lineages flicker out all the time. So yeah, I can see how this was a necessity, and they made it work, and it's beautiful. And I think it also highlights this sort of authentic lineage of the mysteries that stretches through times when it's maybe not really has been recognized as such. So I appreciate that as well.
Yeah. So at what point this tradition actually did disappear is unknown. There's talk as late as the 9th century that the initiations were still being given in Athens, but I can't find a good proof of that. I suspect that they were still going on in the 6th century. So, like 50, 60 years after Proclus's death, they had moved to, Proclus's chief student was Ammonius Hermias. Proclus had studied with Hermias in Athens. Hermias had returned to Alexandria. There was a huge contingent from Alexandria studying at this spiritual college in Athens. And Hermias's son was one of Proclus's top students, one of the top mathematicians of the age, returned to Alexandria, and there was an Egyptian family who practiced the rites of Isis, very Hellenistic Egyptian mystery tradition. But they had a school in Alexandria where the full Hermetic and Hellenistic tradition was taught. And Ammonius was teaching there, and his student Eutychius, another great mathematician and geometer. And it was from these two that the designers studied mathematics, geometry, and so on. And as we know from Proclus's commentary on Euclid, it was profoundly spiritualized mathematics and geometry that they would have studied. It was as close to the Pythagorean tradition as you can get, actually. Actually working the mathematical and geometrical problems was a fundamental spiritual discipline. And this unity of form, shape, and the spiritual forces was totally acknowledged at that time. So there was no architecture, a sacred architecture that was not actually an invocation of spiritual forces and intended to be so.
Well, I mean, you probably know this, so I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but you have a huge devoted following of readers who really, really appreciate what you do and the work you bring forth. And I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. I mean, as a writer, of course, I have, apart from podcasts, I have almost no engagement with, I don't know who reads my books. I get very little feedback about them. I try and make the podcasts available. I know the books are a bit expensive. They're all richly decorated, and they can't be published for any cheaper than what Scarlet Imprint is doing. So I know that they're a bit of a reach for a large audience. So I want to do the podcast to make sure the content is available to as many people who want access to it. Even if they can't afford the books, core ideas and the processes and everything, I try and make as accessible as possible. So that's all part of the service that I see myself as engaged in.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I know you just finished this project, but any plans for further research, another book maybe on the horizon?
Yeah, I'm working on a book which I'm struggling to find a title for, but essentially it's a study of the time deity in the Western tradition. Okay, I don't want to say, oh, it's a book about the cult of Saturn. It is and it isn't. The Saturn is just one aspect of the time deity. And especially most people's view of Saturn is the planetary intelligence, okay? Whereas the time deity is something far vaster. And there is a cult apparatus within the Western tradition for honoring and working with the time deity. And I'm engaged in a process of articulating that through imagery and through contemplation and meditation, which will be the subject of the next work. So that work is advanced. It's I don't know. I'm planning to finish it this year, this summer if I can, but I don't know. In a sense, it's also a vast subject, so I have to be careful to keep a boundary on it. It has to be bounded. But tracing the fascinating evolution of the time deity in the Western tradition is the essence of the book.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, that it's going to be interesting, and it will be illustrated with cult items. So again, you know, like my other books, it has a strong visual element. So it'll also help. I mean, for me, time is the most precious resource each of us has, because it's finite in this life. So how we spend our time is absolutely central to the spiritual path. Okay. So the different ways in which we experience time, the vagaries of time, not time as physics, time as phenomenology. Okay, the vagaries of experiential time are the essence of a spiritual practice. And I'm identified like 7 dimensions in which time is experienced and in which we need to have a spiritual response to it. Okay, so that lies at the core of the book. So I hope that you know, my own contemplation or reflection on that will be helpful in a kind of direct way to people, for people.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, looking forward to that one for sure.
Yeah. Oh, that will be published by Theon, which is a bit of a change for me. And the reason is that I'm so advanced with the project, and Scarlett's have only just published Hagia Sophia. So it's like an overload. They have a lot of projects they need to get out, which will probably take them through the rest of this year and into next year. So they just said to me, well, look, you know, we can't handle this, but please just go ahead. They don't wish to be, you know, stand in the way of its realization. And Theon were very positive, very enthusiastic about it. So okay, let's do this. So that's gonna, you know, I'll be working on it like 10 hours a day from now until it's ready. So I'm targeting the summer to have a complete text. Let's see if I can. I will do that. Beyond that, I wanted to look at the Egyptian mysteries, because for me, you know, since I was like 7, 8 years old, that has been an obsession. And, you know, I was very fortunate at the age of 8 or 9, I went through Egypt, and I was able to visit the pyramid and go in it. And I saw the Tutankhamun treasures then.
Wow.
And that has haunted me all my life. So I wanted to do justice to the mystery initiatory tradition in Egypt. about which very, very little is known or written. Because most of us think of the Egyptian mysteries in terms of, for instance, Apuleius's metamorphosis and his initiation into the mysteries of Isis. Okay, but I learned now that the mysteries of Isis were more a Hellenistic tradition than a native Egyptian one. So with this project, I want to go far up the Nile into Africa, to the interface of the Nile and Saharan cultures in the Bronze Age, and look at the primitive roots of initiation and how that may have been conveyed during the ritual processes that are depicted on the walls of the tombs. Okay, so it's a question, a bit like the Mistai extracted the initiatory process from the frescoes. I want to do a similar process with the elaborate ritual processes embedded within the Egyptian tombs of the earliest, pharaohs, the old kingdom, if possible.
So are you going to go to Egypt to do that?
Yeah, I may well do that. I may fly to Aswan. I hope to do that. If anyone wants to come along, just let me know.
Very, very tempting.
Yeah, that sounds really, really
it
tempting.
Sounds cool, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting how far the rites of Isis penetrated into Western Europe as well. Sorry, just to riff a bit on what you're saying. But
no, that's why I mentioned it. For most of us, I'd always assumed that, it must be Isis, but no, it was Hathor. And that's a really different scene. It's, having a sense of Hathor as a goddess in the earliest strata of Egyptian religion is radically different.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about ecstatic priestesshood with their heavily tattooed bodies and so on.
Wow.
We're really on the borders now with African, religious practices.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, well, Peter, I really want to thank you for taking the time to sit down with us and share so much about your wonderful book. And this has been really tremendous and a lot of material to dig into. I mean, there's just so much there. It's been wonderful to hear about it. And I feel really blessed to have this chance to talk with you and to share this conversation. So thank you again.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, it's always a pleasure, Greg, and Billy. It's always a pleasure to talk to you guys.
Oh, we appreciate it very, very much. And I know the listeners do too, because they always let me know, we love to hear Peter Mark Adams.
Yes. Overwhelming support there for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wonderful. I mean, as I say, I get very little feedback back my end of the woods here. So it's wonderful to hear that.
Yeah, you should know. You just have a very
thank you.
dedicated following.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I think as well, this book on Hagia Sophia should be of interest to any Masons.
Absolutely.
Because I can't think of another book on sacred architecture that has really connected physical architecture with the Platonic and Pythagorean tradition. Here, this is like a main line for that.
Yeah, this will be in every Grand Lodge library.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Peter. And
thank you so much, Greg.
We will let you know as soon as this is released. Hopefully, the sooner the better.
Great. Yeah, great.
All right.
And in the chamber of reflection and at our Patreon, Billy and I continue the interview with Peter Mark Adams, including the contrast of the aesthetics of the Hagia Sophia and other Christian churches, the spiritual and metaphysical significance of light and sound, the adaptation of pagan deity names and words of power into Byzantine Christian liturgy, and much, much more. Join us for that compelling conversation. And I'd like to remind you that although you're able to listen to this podcast at no charge, it costs time and money to create.
We ask you to support our efforts and the creation of future episodes by joining the membership section at chamberofreflection.com or subscribing via Patreon at patreon.com/occultapersonality. As always, if you're already supporting the show or have done so in the past, my heartfelt thanks, and I salute you. And please remember, we are in the midst of our Meditations on the Tarot Study Circle that is open to all Chamber of Reflection paid members. In June, we're meeting to discuss temperance, and you should join us.